When a millionaire CEO saw his daughter's anxiety eased by a stranger's kindness, he never expected that act to cost her job until he realized helping her was exactly what the world needed. Evelyn Parker had always been known among her colleagues as someone kind-hearted and dependable. She worked at a bustling corporate office in the city, where the pace was fast and the pressure often felt relentless. Every morning she arrived early, making sure her workspace was organized, and always offered a cheerful smile to anyone who walked by. But Evelyn's true nature wasn't just about being polite or diligent at her job. It was about noticing the small details, the little things that often went unseen by others. On one particular day, the company was hosting a large event for clients and employees, a gathering meant to celebrate recent successes and foster connections. The room was filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and the hum of conversations. Staff members moved swiftly, ensuring everything ran smoothly. Amid all this, Sophie, the CEO's young daughter, was quietly sitting in a corner, looking overwhelmed. Sophie had autism, a condition that made crowded and noisy places extremely difficult for her to handle. Loud noises, unfamiliar faces, and fast-moving conversations could easily make her anxious, sometimes even leading to panic. Evelyn noticed Sophie immediately. While most people were focused on their tasks or networking, Evelyn saw a small figure sitting apart from the crowd, fidgeting and looking uneasy. She instinctively felt drawn to her. Evelyn had always had a natural way with children, and she could sense when someone needed help even without words. She gently approached Sophie, kneeling down to her level, and smiled warmly. "Hi there," she said softly. "Do you want me to help you feel more comfortable here?" Sophie looked up, her eyes wide, and nodded shyly. Instead of calling attention to herself or trying to follow strict rules about staff interactions, Evelyn simply focused on Sophie. She spoke in a calm and reassuring voice, making sure to respect the little girl's personal space. She asked Sophie if she wanted to walk around slowly, or maybe sit somewhere quieter. Sophie, feeling that someone genuinely cared for her, decided to follow Evelyn's lead. Evelyn guided her through the room, explaining in gentle terms what was happening around them. "That's the buffet," she said, pointing with a smile. "There are lots of snacks, and you can choose whatever you like. We'll stay close together." Sophie began to relax, her anxious fidgeting slowing down as Evelyn kept talking in a soft and steady manner. Throughout the evening, Evelyn remained attentive to Sophie's needs. She noticed when Sophie was starting to feel overwhelmed by noise or movement, and she would quietly suggest moving to a quieter corner or simply taking a deep breath together. She celebrated small victories with Sophie, like when Sophie smiled at a staff member or tried a snack from the buffet. Evelyn's patience and kindness were evident to anyone who might have been watching, but most people were too busy to notice. Evelyn wasn't doing this for recognition. She genuinely wanted Sophie to feel safe and happy. However, not everyone appreciated Evelyn's actions. The office had strict rules about staff interactions with visitors, especially the CEO's family. Some managers believed that employees should never interfere or take initiative unless specifically instructed. When Evelyn's manager found out that she had personally helped Sophie, they were upset. To them, Evelyn had broken protocol, and they decided that her actions, no matter how well-intentioned, could not go unpunished. They reprimanded her harshly, claiming that rules were rules. Despite her explanations and the gentle, considerate way she had acted, the decision was made. Evelyn was to be fired. The news of Evelyn's termination spread through the office quickly. Her colleagues were shocked and saddened, finding it hard to understand why someone who had shown such compassion would face punishment. They knew Evelyn as a person of integrity, someone who always put others first. The idea that she could be fired for helping a child seemed unjust. Whispers of disbelief floated through the hallways. Evelyn, meanwhile, felt a mix of confusion, sadness, and quiet pride. She knew she had done the right thing, even if it meant facing consequences. She didn't regret helping Sophie. She only wished that people could see the genuine care behind her actions. Meanwhile, at home, Sophie couldn't stop talking about the kind lady who had helped her. She described Evelyn's gentle voice, the way she had guided her through the crowd, and how safe she had felt in Evelyn's presence. Sophie's parents, and eventually the CEO himself, began to hear bits and pieces of the story. Richard Montgomery, the CEO, had always been protective of his daughter, especially in environments that could be overwhelming for her. Hearing Sophie's recounting of the evening, describing a woman who had made a difficult situation manageable and comforting, sparked his curiosity and concern. He had no idea who this employee was, or that she had even been fired. But he knew instantly that someone had gone above and beyond for his daughter, as Evelyn left the office that day, carrying her belongings with quiet dignity. She could never have imagined the ripple effect of her actions. She didn't know that her kindness had caught the attention of the CEO, that it would soon change the course of her career and her life. At that moment, all she felt was a sense of fulfillment. She had done what she believed was right, and that, to her, mattered more than any job or paycheck. Her story was one of quiet courage, showing how empathy and attention to another person's needs could make a profound difference. Even in the face of unfair consequences, it was the beginning of something bigger, a chain of events that would demonstrate the power of compassion and the impact of small acts of kindness in the most unexpected places. The day after Evelyn Parker's firing, the office was buzzing with uneasy energy. Her absence was immediately noticeable. People whispered in corners, exchanged worried glances, and speculated about what had happened. Many employees admired Evelyn for her kindness and professionalism, and the news of her termination for helping a child seemed both shocking and unfair. There was a feeling of tension in the air, as though the office had lost not just a colleague, but someone who quietly brought humanity into the daily grind of corporate life. Meanwhile, at home, Sophie Montgomery couldn't stop thinking about Evelyn. She had spent the night replaying the events in her mind, the way Evelyn had smiled, the gentle way she had guided her through the crowd, and the comfort she had felt just being near someone who seemed to truly understand her. Sophie was used to being cautious around strangers, especially in busy, loud environments. But Evelyn had made her feel safe, as if someone had built a little bubble around her where nothing scary could touch her. Sophie wanted to see Evelyn again. She also wanted to tell her father about what had happened. Richard Montgomery, the CEO, was finishing a late-night meeting when Sophie approached him. She climbed onto his lap and, in her usual, unfiltered way, began recounting the events. "Daddy," she said, "there was a lady at the office yesterday. She helped me when everyone else was busy. She made the noise go away, and I didn't feel scared." Richard listened carefully, his eyebrows knitting together in concern. Sophie continued, describing Evelyn's patience, her soft voice, and the way she had never forced Sophie to do anything she didn't want to. The little girl's words were full of admiration and gratitude, and Richard could hear the relief in her voice, the calm she had felt after a chaotic evening. Richard had always been protective of Sophie, understanding that her autism made certain social situations extremely difficult. He knew how overwhelming a corporate event could be, especially with so many strangers and so much noise. Hearing Sophie talk about Evelyn stirred something in him, a mix of curiosity and concern. Who was this woman? Why hadn't he heard of her before? And why had she been fired? The thought that someone had punished an employee for helping his daughter didn't sit right with him. The next morning, Richard decided to find out more. He asked his assistant to compile a list of everyone who had been at the event and cross-check it with HR reports. He wanted to understand exactly who had interacted with Sophie and how. Employees were summoned quietly and questions were asked tactfully. Though Richard's sharp instincts made it clear he wasn't going to settle for vague answers, slowly the pieces of the story began to come together. Security footage showed Evelyn noticing Sophie sitting alone, appearing uncomfortable and approaching her with care. The videos confirmed that Evelyn had stayed by Sophie's side throughout the evening, speaking gently, guiding her, and keeping her calm while the event continued around them. When Richard learned that Evelyn had been fired for these actions, his initial reaction was a mixture of anger and disbelief. He couldn't understand how someone could punish another person for showing compassion, especially when that compassion had directly helped his own child. The office manager's explanation, citing protocol violations, did little to soothe his frustration. From Richard's perspective, Evelyn had done more than just help a child. She had gone out of her way to make someone feel safe in an overwhelming situation, an action that should have been praised, not punished. As Richard continued to dig deeper, he spoke with several employees who had witnessed Evelyn's actions firsthand. They described how Evelyn had calmly handled Sophie's anxiety, how she had ignored the chaos around her to focus solely on the child's comfort, and how her gentle demeanor had allowed Sophie to navigate the overwhelming environment without distress. Richard listened to these accounts, feeling increasingly certain that Evelyn had acted from genuine care, not personal gain or ambition. He also realized that firing her could have long-term negative effects on the company's morale. If employees saw that compassion could be punished, they might stop showing kindness altogether. Meanwhile, news of Evelyn's firing continued to circulate in hushed tones around the office. Many of her colleagues were angry and saddened. Some considered speaking up, but feared repercussions, unsure how much influence they really had. Evelyn, for her part, remained composed. She knew she had done the right thing, even if the consequences had been harsh. While she missed her coworkers and the environment she had grown to love, she also carried a quiet sense of pride. She had helped Sophie, and that mattered more than anything else. Back at home, Sophie's excitement over Evelyn's help grew with each retelling of the story. She drew pictures of the evening, depicting herself holding hands with Evelyn and walking calmly through the crowded room. Sophie wanted her father to understand exactly how much of a difference Evelyn had made. Richard, observing his daughter's enthusiasm and relief, realized that the woman who had been fired had earned his respect and gratitude. Whether she knew it or not, the following day, Richard began planning his next move. He wanted to speak directly with Evelyn, to understand her perspective, and ensure she knew how much her actions had meant to Sophie. He also wanted to correct the injustice that had occurred. In his mind, this was more than just a human resources issue. It was a moral imperative. Someone had gone above and beyond to help his daughter, and that act of kindness deserved recognition, not punishment, as he prepared to call Evelyn. Richard reflected on the broader implications of the situation. He realized that workplaces often valued rules and efficiency over empathy, and that small acts of compassion could sometimes be seen as disruptive or inconvenient. But in this case, ignoring such acts could lead to regret, missed opportunities, and unnecessary hurt. He understood that Evelyn's actions had not only helped Sophie that evening, but it also set an example of how care and patience could create meaningful connections, even in high-pressure environments. By the end of Part 2, the stage was set for a turning point. Richard's curiosity, concern, and growing admiration for Evelyn's kindness had reached a point where action was inevitable. The story was no longer just about a fired employee. It had become about the recognition of genuine compassion, the protection of those who act with integrity, and the power of one person's courage to inspire change in an entire workplace. Evelyn's fate, intertwined now with the CEO and his daughter, was about to take a dramatic and heartwarming turn. Richard Montgomery couldn't stop thinking about the events of the previous night. Sophie's words, full of excitement and relief, kept echoing in his mind. How a kind woman had stepped in when everyone else had been too busy to notice his daughter's distress. Richard, a man used to making decisions quickly and running a vast corporation efficiently, felt something unusual stir inside him, a mix of curiosity, admiration, and frustration. Curiosity, because he wanted to know who this remarkable woman was. Admiration, because someone had acted with pure kindness in a busy, stressful environment. And frustration, because she had been punished for doing exactly the right thing. The first step Richard took was to contact his assistant and request all records of the event, including the attendance list, staff schedules, and security footage. He wanted to find out exactly who had interacted with Sophie. He wasn't interested in blame or office politics, simply wanted to ensure that the person who had helped his daughter was recognized. As he reviewed the list and spoke with a few trusted employees, one name kept coming up: Evelyn Parker. Every account described a woman who had noticed Sophie sitting alone, appearing overwhelmed, and who had calmly guided her through the chaos with patience and care. Richard watched the security footage carefully. He saw Evelyn approach Sophie, kneel down to her level, and speak softly, her body language gentle and reassuring. She gestured subtly to encourage Sophie to move toward a quieter area, spoke calmly to ease her anxiety, and stayed with her throughout the entire event. Richard felt a wave of admiration. Here was someone who had acted entirely out of empathy, without concern for recognition, rules, or office politics. Evelyn had seen what needed to be done and had done it quietly, effectively, and with warmth. But when Richard learned that Evelyn had been fired, his admiration turned to disbelief and anger. How could anyone punish someone for helping a child, especially his own? He called HR and demanded an explanation, asking for the details of why Evelyn's actions had been deemed unacceptable. The HR manager hesitated, citing company protocol, rules, and chain of command violations. Richard listened, but felt increasingly frustrated. "She helped my daughter feel safe," he said firmly, "and that should never be a reason for punishment. I want her back here, and I want this mistake corrected immediately." Richard realized that Evelyn had not only helped Sophie, but had also demonstrated values he wanted to see more of in his company: empathy, initiative, and a focus on people, not just processes. He began thinking about the broader picture. Companies often emphasized rules and efficiency over compassion, and employees who acted from the heart could be overlooked or even penalized. Evelyn's actions had reminded him that sometimes the right thing to do might bend the rules slightly. The impact on people could be profound and lasting. He then began contacting some of the employees who had witnessed Evelyn's actions. They described in detail how she had recognized Sophie's discomfort immediately, how she had adjusted her approach to suit the little girl's needs, and how she had never tried to show off or gain praise. Richard was impressed by the consistency of their accounts. Everyone seemed to agree. Evelyn had acted with grace, skill, and kindness. Not only had she helped Sophie that day, but she had also modeled the kind of compassion he wanted to see in his entire organization. Richard decided he needed to speak to Evelyn personally. He asked his assistant to track her down and arrange a meeting. When the assistant delivered the news that Evelyn had been available and willing to meet, Richard felt a sense of anticipation. He was eager not only to understand her perspective, but also to express gratitude. This wasn't going to be a simple HR conversation. Richard wanted to connect with someone who had shown such remarkable humanity in an environment that often overlooked it. When Evelyn arrived at his office, she was composed but wary. She didn't know what to expect, she only knew she had been called to meet the CEO. Richard greeted her warmly and asked her to sit down. He began by asking her about the event, about what had happened with Sophie, and how she had decided to help. Evelyn explained in her quiet, sincere way that she had seen a child struggling and had simply wanted to help. "I didn't think about rules or protocols," she admitted. "I just wanted her to feel safe. That's all that mattered to me." Richard nodded, feeling a deep respect for her honesty and her selflessness. He then told her about Sophie's recounting of the evening, how she had described Evelyn's actions with such detail and emotion, and how much it had meant to the little girl. Evelyn listened, her eyes widening slightly as she realized the impact of what she had done. Richard continued, explaining that he had learned she had been fired for helping Sophie. Evelyn's face fell slightly, a mix of shame and disbelief crossing her features. I didn't mean to break any rules," she said softly. "I just wanted to help." Richard smiled gently and shook his head. "Rules are important," he said, "but sometimes doing the right thing means putting people first. And that is exactly what you did. That's why you're not just going to be reinstated. You're going to have a new role here, one that values empathy, initiative, and supporting families." Evelyn was stunned. She had never imagined that helping a child could lead to recognition, let alone a promotion or a special assignment. Richard explained that he wanted her to help design programs that would make the workplace more supportive for employees, families, create policies that allowed compassion to thrive alongside productivity, and serve as a model for others in the company. Evelyn's heart swelled with a mix of relief, pride, and excitement. Not only had her actions been acknowledged, but she was also being entrusted with responsibilities that aligned perfectly with her values. Over the next few days, Richard and Evelyn began working together to outline her new role. They discussed employee wellness programs, training for staff to better understand and support children and family members with special needs. and ways to encourage compassion and empathy across the company. Richard often remarked how inspiring it was to see someone act purely from the heart and how much of an impact a single person could have. Evelyn, meanwhile, felt a renewed sense of purpose. She had started her career wanting to make a difference. And now, through this unexpected turn of events, she had an opportunity to do just that on a larger scale. The story of Evelyn's actions. In her meeting with Richard quickly spread among the staff. People were inspired not just by her courage and empathy, but also by the fact that leadership recognized and rewarded such qualities. It was a reminder that acts of kindness, no matter how small they seemed at the time, could create ripples far beyond what anyone could imagine. The office atmosphere began to shift subtly. Employees felt encouraged to pay attention to the needs of others, to act when necessary, and to understand that compassion was not just tolerated, but valued by the end of this part of the story. Evelyn had transitioned from being an overlooked employee, facing unjust termination, to a trusted advisor and role model in the company. Richard, for his part, had reaffirmed his commitment to prioritizing people in a high-pressure corporate environment. Sophie had already benefited from Evelyn's kindness, and now the impact was set to extend far beyond a single evening. Richard often reflected on how one act of empathy had uncovered a hidden opportunity to improve his company culture, create meaningful change, and honor someone who had shown what true compassion looked like in action. Evelyn Parker walked into the office the morning after her meeting with Richard Montgomery, feeling a mix of nervousness and cautious excitement. The previous few days had been overwhelming, facing the shock of being fired for an action she had thought was simple and kind, and then being unexpectedly summoned to meet the CEO himself. But now, everything was about to change. She had been told she was being reinstated, and not just reinstated, but entrusted with a new role focused on empathy, family support, and employee wellness. Still, walking into the office she had left under such difficult circumstances, Evelyn felt a flutter of nerves. Would her colleagues treat her differently? Would she feel comfortable again? As she approached her former desk, she noticed subtle changes. People whispered softly among themselves, casting glances in her direction. Some smiled warmly, while others simply nodded with a mix of respect and relief. Evelyn realized that her colleagues had not forgotten her. They had seen what had happened and were now waiting to welcome her back. The office atmosphere, which had been tense and uncertain in her absence, seemed to brighten subtly, as if her return signaled a shift toward something better. Richard had already called a small meeting to officially welcome Evelyn back. As she entered the conference room, she noticed a few familiar faces, including HR representatives, department heads, and a handful of colleagues who had witnessed her actions with Sophie. Richard greeted her warmly, standing up to shake her hand. "Evelyn, we are thrilled to have you back," he said. "Your actions at the event went above and beyond, and they showed the kind of heart and integrity we want to see in this company. You are not just an employee, you are a role model." Evelyn felt her chest swell with a mix of pride, relief, and gratitude. Richard then outlined Evelyn's new responsibilities. She would be designing programs to support employees with children, especially those who might have special needs. She would help train staff to respond empathetically to difficult situations, guide policies that prioritized human care alongside productivity, and create a culture where kindness was recognized as a core value. Evelyn listened carefully, realizing the immense trust and responsibility being placed upon her. It wasn't just a job, it was an opportunity to create real, lasting change in the lives of employees and their families. As the meeting continued, Richard shared how Sophie had spoken about Evelyn. "My daughter couldn't stop talking about you," he said with a warm smile. "She felt safe because of your care, and that made a real impression on me. Not everyone gets to see the difference they make, but I want you to know that you've made a big one for my family and for this company." Evelyn was deeply moved. She had never considered that her simple act of kindness could resonate so strongly, or that it could lead to a chance to make systemic improvements. After the meeting, Evelyn returned to her desk, now personalized with flowers and a small welcome sign from her colleagues. They came over to congratulate her, sharing words of encouragement and admiration. Some spoke softly, recounting how unfair her firing had felt, while others expressed relief that leadership had recognized her value. Evelyn realized that her courage in helping Sophie had inspired others, and that her story was already starting to influence the office culture. It was more than a personal victory, it was a shared moment of hope and positive change in the days that followed. Evelyn immersed herself in her new role. She met with department heads, HR teams, and staff members to understand the challenges families faced within the company. She listened to stories from parents balancing demanding work schedules with children who required extra attention. She noted areas where policies could be adjusted, where training could improve, and where small acts of support could make employees feel valued and understood. Her experience with Sophie gave her a unique perspective, allowing her to empathize deeply and offer practical solutions that others might have overlooked. Richard checked in regularly, not to micromanage, but to offer guidance and encouragement. He wanted Evelyn to feel empowered to make changes and to trust her instincts. He recognized that someone who acted from the heart, as Evelyn had, could bring insights and innovations that traditional management processes often missed. Together, they began sketching out initiatives that would later become formal programs: quiet spaces for employees and children, staff training on autism and other special needs, and recognition systems for employees who went above and beyond to help others. Sophie, too, was thrilled with the changes. She felt a connection to Evelyn that went beyond the office walls. Whenever Richard returned from work, Sophie would excitedly recount how Evelyn had helped her, and how she would now help other children and families through her new role. The bond between Evelyn and Sophie grew stronger, built on trust, respect, and shared experiences. Evelyn found herself thinking often about Sophie, realizing that her actions had not only changed the child's day, but had also opened the door to a wider impact that she could help create. The ripple effects of Evelyn's reinstatement and new role were soon visible across the company. Employees began to act with more empathy toward one another. Stories of small acts of kindness, checking in on a stressed colleague, helping a parent navigate a childcare issue, or offering support to someone struggling with a personal challenge started to circulate, creating a sense of unity and shared purpose. Evelyn had become a symbol of how compassion could coexist with efficiency, proving that caring for people did not weaken a company's productivity, but rather strengthened it. Evelyn also encountered challenges. Not everyone initially understood her new role, and a few managers were skeptical about prioritizing empathy in the workplace. But Evelyn approached these situations with patience, using her own experiences and clear examples to demonstrate the value of her initiatives. Over time, even the skeptics began to see the benefits: happier employees, stronger teamwork, and a culture that encouraged both personal and professional growth. Evelyn's efforts, once considered a minor act of kindness, had now grown into a movement that was reshaping the company's values. Richard often reflected on the events that brought Evelyn into this position. He realized that hiring her, supporting her reinstatement, and empowering her in her new role had been one of the best decisions he had ever made as a CEO. Evelyn's dedication, empathy, and courage had not only helped his daughter, but it also inspired a broader transformation within the company. The story of her actions became a favorite example in meetings and company materials, demonstrating the power of doing the right thing and the impact one person can have when they act from the heart. By the end of this period, Evelyn had fully embraced her new role, and the company had begun to feel like a different place. Employees were more willing to look out for each other, to take small risks in helping one another, and to understand the value of compassion in everyday interactions. Evelyn's story was no longer just about a fired employee who helped a child. It had become a story of hope, courage, and the profound influence that one person can have when they act with kindness and integrity. Evelyn's journey in this chapter of her life demonstrated that even in rigid corporate environments, humanity and empathy could flourish. Her actions had created lasting change, not just for Sophie or for her colleagues, but for the company as a whole. And while she continued to face challenges in her new role, she did so with confidence, knowing that her compassion had been recognized, valued, and amplified to touch the lives of many. After Evelyn Parker had settled into her new role, life at the company began to change in ways no one could have predicted. Employees started noticing small differences in how the workplace felt. The air seemed lighter, conversations more genuine, and teamwork stronger than ever before. Evelyn's initiatives encouraged people to look beyond deadlines and productivity metrics and pay attention to the human side of the office, the kind gestures, the small acts of support, and the quiet ways people helped each other. It was subtle at first, but gradually, a culture of empathy began to grow. Evelyn had started several programs to support employees' families, especially those with children who had special needs like Sophie. She organized workshops that helped staff understand autism, ADHD, and other conditions, teaching practical ways to communicate and provide support. Quiet rooms were set up where employees could take breaks with their children or allow children to decompress during busy days. Evelyn personally led training sessions for managers, explaining how small gestures of kindness could have a big impact on employee morale and productivity. Her efforts transformed the company from a place where rules were rigid and interactions were often impersonal to an environment that valued care, understanding, and human connection. Sophie remained a big part of Evelyn's life. The little girl had formed a deep bond with Evelyn, trusting her in ways that went beyond the initial event. Evelyn would sometimes visit Sophie at home, helping her with school projects, playing games, or simply sitting and talking when Sophie needed to share her feelings. Sophie looked forward to these visits, and Richard often marveled at the positive influence Evelyn had on his daughter. It was clear that Evelyn's kindness had created a lasting connection, not just during a stressful evening at a corporate event, but in Sophie's everyday life. As the months went by, the story of Evelyn's actions began to reach outside the company. Richard, recognizing the value of her work, mentioned Evelyn's story in interviews, highlighting how small acts of compassion could have transformative effects. The story was shared in business magazines, on social media, and in local newspapers. People admired the fact that a CEO had recognized and rewarded an employee for kindness, setting an example for companies everywhere. Evelyn became known not only as a model employee, but also as someone who had helped redefine what it meant to lead with empathy. Inside the office, Evelyn's initiatives flourished. Parents found comfort in the programs she had implemented, children felt supported, and employees discovered that the company genuinely cared about their well-being. Her quiet influence created a ripple effect. Colleagues began helping one another in ways that hadn't existed before. A junior employee might cover for a coworker who had to take a child to the doctor. Another would patiently guide a colleague who was struggling with a difficult task. Acts of compassion, once rare and unacknowledged, became part of the office culture. Evelyn had turned her personal act of kindness into a movement that affected everyone around her. Richard often observed these changes with a sense of pride. He realized that hiring Evelyn back and supporting her new role had done more than correct an injustices had transformed the company. The values she embodied, particularly empathy and patience, became central to the corporate identity. During meetings, Richard frequently reminded employees that understanding and supporting one another was as important as meeting financial goals. Evelyn's influence proved that a single person, acting with integrity and courage, could shift the culture of an entire organization. Meanwhile, Evelyn herself continued to grow personally and professionally. She learned to navigate her responsibilities, balancing program development with mentoring staff and meeting with executives. She was often faced with challenges. Some managers were initially skeptical of her approach, and some employees were resistant to change. But Evelyn met these challenges with patience and determination. She used her own experiences with Sophie as examples, showing how small gestures of understanding could lead to big results. Slowly but surely, even the skeptics began to embrace the new approach. The most rewarding moments for Evelyn were the small, personal successes. A parent would tell her how the quiet rooms had helped their child during a busy day at the office. A manager would express gratitude for the training, explaining that they now understood how to better support employees facing family challenges. And Sophie would smile when she saw Evelyn, excited to share stories from her school or show her new drawings. These moments reminded Evelyn why she had acted with kindness in the first place and why her work mattered so much. The bond between Evelyn, Sophie, and Richard became even stronger. Richard often involved Evelyn in family decisions, valuing her perspective not just as an employee, but as someone who had shown genuine care for his daughter. He realized that her influence extended beyond professional boundaries. She had become part of their family in an important way. Sophie, confident and happy, continued to thrive, her self-esteem strengthened by the support she received from Evelyn. The little girl's life had been changed in ways that Evelyn never could have anticipated when she simply offered a helping hand at a crowded corporate event. Evelyn's story also inspired others. Outside the company, stories circulated about employees who had gone above and beyond to help children or colleagues in need. Businesses in the area began to take notice, asking for advice on how to create a culture of empathy similar to the one Evelyn had fostered. Her work showed that compassion wasn't just morally right, it was also practical, leading to more engaged employees, stronger loyalty, and a healthier, more productive workplace. As time passed, the company continued to flourish. Evelyn's initiatives became permanent parts of the corporate structure, not temporary projects. Parents and employees alike appreciated the support, and the positive environment attracted talented people who valued empathy and human connection as much as career growth. Richard often reflected on how one simple act of kindness, as Evelyn helping Sophie, had set off a chain of events that transformed not just a single family, but an entire organization. For Evelyn, the journey was both humbling and empowering. She had faced unfair treatment, yet her commitment to doing the right thing had led to recognition, growth, and meaningful change. She realized that kindness, patience, and empathy were powerful tools, capable of reshaping lives and influencing others in ways no one could have predicted. Her actions reminded everyone that courage doesn't always mean standing up to a crowd. It sometimes means quietly doing what's right, even when it's risky or inconvenient. By the end of this chapter, Evelyn had become more than an employee. She had become a symbol of compassion and integrity. Sophie had gained a trusted friend and advocate. Richard had learned to value empathy as a cornerstone of leadership, and the company had evolved into a place where care for people was as important as profit. The story of Evelyn's courage and kindness spread far beyond the office, leaving a legacy that inspired individuals and organizations alike to prioritize humanity, understanding, and the simple yet profound impact of helping others. Evelyn's journey demonstrated that one act of kindness could ripple outward in unimaginable ways. What began as a single moment, helping a young girl navigate a busy event, grew into a movement that changed a company, strengthened a family, and inspired countless others. Her story proved that compassion, courage, and integrity are not just virtues. They are powerful forces capable of transforming the world, one small act at a time.